Umlen and Amlat Gemara. We are up to Daf Tzadik Hey. Actually, Tzadik Hey Amid Beis. This is Thursday's Gemara. We did much of the Gemara already on Wednesday. So the Gemara the Mishnah. We're up to the Mishnah. Daf Tzadik Hey Amid Beis. So we're talking about the Korban Chatas, and now we're saying that Echad Shebishal Boy, whether it's the vessel that you cooked in it, or whether you poured into the vessel hot korban chatas, the din is, and we have a problem because after the 24 hours you have noises, so you have to therefore kasher the keli. So whether you cooked inside the keli or whether you just poured from the korban chatas hot inside the keli, echad koche hakochim ve'echad kochim kalim. It makes no difference whether it's chatos or whether any other korban, because noiser is an issue everywhere. Is to unin, they require merika v'shtifa. When it comes to clay cheres, earthenware, we say you have to break it, but when it comes to other kalim like copper, we say that you have to just kasher it and rinse it. And it makes no difference whether it's koche kalim. Nice is an issue everywhere. However, Rab Shimon disagrees. Rab Shimon Aimer kochim kalim ain't tu'unin merika v'shtifa. Kochim kalim don't require merika v'shtifa, which is actually difficult to understand. What do you mean you don't require merika v'shtifa? You have a problem nicer there as well. So the Gemara at the end is going to learn, according to one opinion, that of course, you need to kasher, but you don't have the same strict rules, the same stringent rules that you have by chatas. By chatas, we're going to say you can only use water. When it comes to other kabbalah, you can use wine or other liquids as well. Anyway, it says the Gemara, Tonabanan, we learned how do you know that not only when you cook korban chatas in it, it becomes, you need to kasher it, but even if you just poured, as known as iri, also you have the kasher. So Torabon, we learned asher. It says in the pasuk that asher tevusha boy. It says in the pasuk there that if it's a klei cheres that you cook the chatas in, you have to break it. But if it's a klei nechoshes, you cook it in, you do merika v'shtifa in water. So it says in the pasuk asher tevusha boy that you cook in it. All we know is that you cooked inside it. What happens? You poured inside there to say hot korban menayin. How do you know that you have to kasher as well? If you learn out from the word, it says "Asher tevushal boy." If you cook in it, you shove it. It says that you cooked, you shove it. What does it say the word boy? To tell you that even if it was just iri, as well, you also have to kasher it. Is a question totally, but the question is going to be, you have two things here. You have iri, you're pouring inside, and you have bishul. What happens if you have cooking inside? Is it a sort of is it because we're worried about noiser? So then obviously it's only if you cooked inside the pot and they got absorbed in the walls. But if you had it suspended in the air of the pot, there's no reason to kasher because there's nothing that entered the walls. But if it's a gzeres hakosov, that anything cooked inside, I don't care, not because it necessarily absorbed the noiser, just that's the way it is. It cooked inside, you need to kasher. Then even if it's suspended in the air, you still need to kasher. And that's Gemara's question. So the question totally ba'avir Tana, what happens? Let's say you had a spit in the avir of the oven. Mahu, what would it didn't be then? Do we say abishul ubiluba de korban? You need two factors. You have to cook and it has to absorb in the wall. And the reason is we are worried about noiser. Oidim, is that the reason why you're kashering? Oidim abishul beloi belua. Or even there's a cost of just cooking, even though nothing got absorbed, you still need to kasher. Amar Rava says, Rava, Toshma, come in here. Echad shebishul boy, whether you cooked in it, echad she'idel l'toichoy, or whether you just poured inside the reisech hot liquids. So we see, what do we see from here? That even just one item, whether it's just, let's say, iri alone, you didn't cook in it, it still needs kashering. So just like the iri on its own needs kashering, so too the bishul on its own needs the kashering. And therefore, even though nothing got absorbed in the walls, there's a cost, so you have to kasher. So the chayri, you resolved your question. Says the Gemara, no, you did not. Because the Gemara says there's no question that if it absorbed noiser, you have to kasher it. So therefore, says the Gemara, we never asked you the question if it just absorbed and didn't cook. Of course, you have to kasher. You have noiser. Our question was, what would be the other way around? You cooked, but there was no belua. What would it didn't be then? So Toshma coming here. So there's a custom that cooking alone is also even though nothing got absorbed. Toshma coming here. Tanu the Shal Migdash. What material was the oven of the Beis Hamikdash made up of? Shal Matras Hoya was made out of metal. Why was it made out of metal? So that it can be kashed. Because now the question is, if you're going to tell me that bishul belay belua, if you cook and you don't and absorb, like copy, we're not really concerned. Is navi shel cheres. Why don't we make it of cheres? And you have the korban chatas on the spit, on the spit there. So therefore, and you wouldn't have to kasher it, unless you're going to say that cooking on its own, even though nothing got absorbed, it's suspended in the air, you still need a kasher, and therefore earthenware is a problem because you can't kasher earthenware because the Torah meida al cheres. She ain't the yitzim the deifel oil. The Torah testifies regarding an earthenware that no matter how many times you kasher it, nevertheless it's so porous, it absorbs so much, you never really are able to extricate or expunge all of the problem, the noise, let's say, or treif, whenever it is. So so the question is, why would the oven basically be made out of metal? It could be made out of cheres and just use a spit. Proves from here that even using a spit, you have to kasher. So the Gemara, even since there are certain kabbanas, the ika there is the shiyari menachas. What do you do with the leftover of the menachas? The afiyosem betanur, that was that you bake it in the oven, is the ika bishul, and over there is cooking because you're actually placing it inside the oven itself, not just in the spit in the air. You're placing it on the walls of the oven, and therefore avdina shamatkas. For that reason, we make it out of metal. That's why we make it out of metal. Because the Gemara, so no raya one way or another, whether bishul on its own, without absorbing what the thing would be. So there's an oven. By the way, it's a big machlekes Rishonim, and we have it a few times, including here at the Beitam, the Rashbam. If iri is clay rishon or not, it's iri kibishul. In other words, bishul, bishul in a clay rishon, cooking in the keli that's sitting on top of the fire. When you're pouring out of that keli onto something else, that's called iri miklei rishon, and then the keli that it falls into is called klei sheni. And the question is, what is the status of this iri miklei rishon? Is it considered like a klei rishon, iri, and it's mevashel, or iri does not have the capacity to be mevashel? So Teish Rabbein Tam brings it right from the Gemara right here. The Gemara says that iri is treated like cooking, and therefore it's clear from here that iri can be mevushel. And there's a big argument. But the crux of the argument is, what is it about a clay rishon that it cooks and you need the ultimate kashering? Is it because, is it the walls of the keli actually are contributing to the heat as well? It's not just the fire that you heat in the fire, but also the walls of the keli are contributing. That's a clay rishon. And if that's the case, then the moment it leaves those walls, it's already a lower step. That's eating clay rishon, lower step. Or it's not the walls of clay rishon that are, and it's the fire itself that makes it so special, so hot, and therefore, even if it's outside those walls, it's still considered clay rishon as mavashel. Anyway, where it continues about an oven. Ahutan is an oven. There was this oven, the atchubei, that they smeared it with tichaya. They smeared it with some kind of fats. And what's the problem? Fleishika fats. The problem is we don't like making milchika bread. We are very worried. You make milchika bread, you might forget, and you will then go ahead and eat it with fleishiks. And in fact, the Shulchan Aruch says in Hilchos Shavuos that, even though we have to eat milk and everything else, you should make milchika bread unless you make it a different design, which is then obvious this is not the normal challah that you have. This must be something else, and it's milchiks. So he said, so this oven that was smeared with flesh, Rabbi was so stringent, he says that you can never, ever eat bread from this oven because there's no way that you can kasher this oven. So it's always will be fleishiks. Even if you want to eat the bread with salt, pariv. because we are concerned. You might eat it with this kutach. That's this moldy bread, milk, and everything else. That it was a delicacy, and we had it a few times, and that was this kutach. Says the Gemara, and they were worried that you can eat it with the bread. So therefore, they should never ever eat from this bread because from this oven, because the oven, everything it will always produce will be milchiks. Anyone makes a question. What are you talking? You're telling me there's no way, there's no remedy of how to kash the oven. You're saying lo oilam it's also forever. We learned ain't losh in a season b'chol. You're not allowed to need a dough with milk. The im losh if it didn't need kolapat kol asur. It's all awesome if they hergel aveda. It's all awesome because of hergel aveda because you might end up doing an avera eating this bread with fleishiks. Kiyotz was similar in toshin as a tanabal. You're not allowed to smear an oven with the fats, the hind fats of an animal. V'im tosh kolapat kol asur. All the breads also. But here it says ad sheyasik es hatana until you kasha the oven. So it's clear from here that you can kasha an oven. Why in the world did you say that any bread coming out of the flesh oven will never be permitted? In other words, this oven will never be able to produce bread that's permitted. Because somewhere else you could, as long as you kasha it. So the Gemara says, to Yufta the Rabba Bar Hiloi, to Yufta, it's actually a repudiation of Rabba Bar Hiloi. So the Gemara has a question. If it's a repudiation, which means you could kasha klecheres, so tell me, how do you explain what we learned in Psachim? Since we rejected what he said, why does Rab say that the pots on Pesach you should break? He said that the earthenware pots from Pesach, chametz sha'avar all of Pesach will be, you'll have this chametz there, and so therefore, you should break it. But why? You can kasher earthenware, as we just said right now. You can kasher earthenware. Says the Gemara. He says, when Rav learns, you can never kash an oven. It says here clearly, achi yasik, it's a tanner. Mukala, he will interpret it's about a metal oven, not an earthenware oven. That's why it could be kashed, but an earthenware oven can never be kashed. Or iboy sema. Of course, earthenware can be kashed, but it depends if it's an oven or a pot. When it comes to an oven, you can kasher it. Why? Because it has where the firewood inside, so therefore inside the pot, where it absorbed the fleishiks, it'll be completely expunged because the fire is inside the pot. But a normal pot inside the oven. But a normal pot, the fire is on the outside. It never has enough heat to be able to remove everything that's inside. So therefore, the case of the oven, we reject what Abba said because you can definitely kasher an earthenware oven from the inside. Ask the Gemara. So every earthenware keli, why do you say you cannot kasher? Just put a fire inside. So every earthenware say that you put a fire inside, you can kasher it. Says the Gemara, we are worried that we are worried that you have too much rachmanis, the mikvah will break. We're scared that you are going to break it, so you're not going to really put the fire in properly, or you can do it very, very quickly because you're scared you're going to break your utensil. And that's why we don't allow kashering earthenware from the inside. But an oven is different; it's not going to break. An oven is made for that, and therefore it's all right. Says the Gemara, therefore, hi kuvya. This thing made out of tiles has seika mebachutzu, and you put bread on it from time to time. Since how do you heat it from the outside? So it can never be kashed, and also it can be kashed. So you might ask a simple question. There is another eitzah, kashering, and that is when it comes to earthenware that. Okay, what he's telling us, earthenware you cannot kasher by putting a torch inside because it's going to bust. But if you put it into a kiln, it sort of it kasher the whole keli. So why do we break it? You know how much money? We have a rule that Torah chasa money Yisrael. The Torah doesn't dispense with people's money just like that. The Torah has achmanis on the Jews' money. So why do we make a rule that every single pot that was used of earthenware has to be broken? Why don't we just say put it back in the kiln? Says the Gemara, Ela Kedei Shel Migdash Shammai Yishavru. Why do you break it? Nahadrinu lekiv shaynais. Why don't you just put it back into the kiln? Put it back in the kiln. Says the Gemara. In fact, you can ask the question: why do we say earthenware has no way of kashering? Just put it back in the kiln. The reason why we say earthenware has no kashering is because when you put it back in the kiln, it's different than when you kasher something. The pot is still the same pot, but what you took out all the iser, all the fluids that were no good, you took them out. But when it comes to a kiln, we say panim chadoshes bo'ulakan, as if it was reinvented. It's a brand new thing. So therefore, we say that earthenware has no way of kashering that is correct. Kiln is not a way of capturing. That's creating a new keli. But the question is, so why in the pots in the base of Mikdash, the earthenware pots, you have to break it, just have a kiln there and do it in the kiln. Remember, it has to be done inside the base of Mikdash. We learned yesterday it has to be done inside the base of Mikdash. Fine. Put a kitchen, put a kiln inside the base of Mikdash. El Kedera Shemigdash, Amai, Amar Rahmanish, why break it? Now didn't look if Shaina put them inside the kiln. Amar Abzedel, you know why? Lefisha Ein Oisin Kif Shainas B'Yerushalayim. We don't have kiln not only in the base of Mikdash, not in the entire Yerushalayim. And the reason is because it generates a lot of smoke, and it's very uncomfortable. Amar Abaye says Abaye. Abai said, you don't make kiln in the Yerushalayim because what? It generates smoke. So what are you going to do instead? You go ahead and you're going to break all these kelim in the Azorah. Where are you going to bury them? You're going to have a heap, like a tip in the middle of the base of Mikdash. So how is that a better remedy? Abai forgot Tony. This is what he learned. Shmaya. This is what Shmaya learned. Bekalnaboy, in the city of Kalnaboy. Rashi says it's a city named after Avodah Zarah, and surprising that then we call it by that city, by that name, but we do. So Kalnaboy and Kalnaboy, that Shivrei Kleicheres, that the broken shards of a Kleicheres, Nivloim and Mekayim, all it was a nest. One of the miracles that happened in the base of Mikdash was that all the broken parts and everything, all the garbage, was sunk into the ground. Says the Gemara, so Rabbi said that in order to make sure that they can just keep on kashering the oven, they didn't want to break it. They made the oven out of metal. Why make it out of metal? Navi decheres. Why don't they just make it out of earthenware? I guess it's a better quality oven. Because it could be kashed. Remember, we just said an oven can be kashed from the inside. Says the Gemara, Kiva the Ika. The reason why they didn't do it is the kivan, the ika. There is everything, all the menachas, everything else has to go into a utensil clay shutters to become consecrated, and then they do whatever the next step is. But the shtei alecha, the 2 loaves of bread, which were prepared and kneaded outside, and then they brought inside, they went straight into the oven. So where's the clay shutters? The clay shutters was the oven itself, and the lechem haponim as well. Went straight to the shulchan. Lafiyosan betana, they were baked in the oven. The kedushasan betana, that's where they became consecrated, which means that the oven itself was a klei shodes. Havle klei shodes, and the rule is the klei shodes, the chedes lo yavdin. We don't make a klei shodes out of earthenware. So therefore, they had to make it out of metal, not because the kashing was a problem, but rather because of it's a klei shodes, and therefore it had to be made out of metal. So the Gemara. Even Rabbi Yosef bar Yehuda, who says that if that we don't want to use things which are that it doesn't have to necessarily be matras, it can be other things. Look at 8, he meant it could be made out of wood. We don't want the thing to be made out of clay, out of cheres, for the reason we said before. The clay shows we don't want to be made out of clay, and that's why the tanner was made out of metal, not because of the kashering process, but rather the reason why it was made out of metal is because it's a clay shutters, and a clay shutters can only be made out of metal, or according to Rabbi Yossi, also out of wood, but not out of clay cheres. Okay, we'll stop over here. We'll continue next time. Have a good day.